So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And before I introduce my esteemed panel, I think this is going to be one of the best sessions of the Finance and Derby, and specifically the most relevant. I think today, more than ever before, the focus and the role of the CFO is really in the spotlight, given the demands of things like digital transformation, regulatory, governance, all these kind of issues, media scams. All at the front. So this is the discussion where we're going to really unpack what is a real CFO, what does it take on that journey to get to that leadership level, to that C-suite level, what are the scars, what are the characteristics and skills of a real leadership, and how that person needs to stand up in this day and age. To my right, I want to introduce Joanne Pohl. Jo is currently the CFO of Bowmans. She's also sat on numerous boards and committees. She's worked both locally and internationally as well. She has consulted to Texan Property Fund. She has worked for Standard Chartered. She has also worked for the Telesure Group. And she's also been the head of finance for Barclays Africa and Middle East. And she sits on a number of various boards and chairs a number of independent areas as well. She was identified as Euromoney's as one of Africa's top 20 rising stars. She's a qualified chartered accountant, but I think the most important thing is she comes across as very principled. She's passionate about empowering people and philanthropy. She counsels cancer patients, and she works with entrepreneurs and is a member of the Thomson Reuters Global 100 CFO Exchange. Besides all of this, Jo is also an amazing human being. She also is the mother of 4 and a wife to an entrepreneur. And then next to her, I have Zaf Mahomed. Zaf is the CFO of Cell Group. Zaf has had experience across all industries and all sectors. He's had over 20 years of financial experience and business experience as well. He prefers to call himself a transformation and change specialist than a CFO when we were talking. And before Cell C, he was the Chief Financial Officer of McDonald's. He was also at Ellerines, and he held various positions at Johnson & Johnson. So I want everybody to give him a quick round of applause. So Zaf, I'm going to start with you. I mean, working in today's economy, it's tough out there. How tough is it being a CFO at the moment?
I think it's getting tougher and tougher as years go by. When I first qualified as a CA, early 90s, and for all of you in the room, that was the last century.
Yeah.
Things have gotten a lot tougher. I think there's a lot more emphasis on softer skills for accountants. That wasn't always the case. I mean, the guys that I studied with and that I worked under were hardcore CAs and accountants. Nowadays, it's a lot more about the softer skills. And that's been the big change for me that I've seen, is a lot more focus on EQ and a lot more focus on running a business. You stand side by side with the CEO now. Before it was the CFO sitting in a back room doing his books, but now it's a lot different.
Jo, I mean, just to add to that, what's kind of keeping you awake at night?
To be frank, very little keeps me awake at night. I'm so shattered, so it's all relative. But I think what is important is more and more the holistic individual is required, because you have to be present and show up at work. I think the finance role requires you to be aware of what's happening in your business, externally impacting your business, and how your people are at any point in time. So I think what I worry about is how well-grounded my team is, and the people that need to be conscious, both as gatekeepers, as control elements in the business, but also being able to give the business insights. How well are they? So do they rest well? Do they eat well? Do they spend time with their families? If they're grounded at home, they're better at work. And that for me is quite worrying. I think the pace has changed. Many years ago, back in the 90s when we qualified, there was month end. I think my family will tell you it's month end every day, so there seems to be a lot faster, the pace is a lot faster, and I worry that we don't take time to recalibrate, make sure holistically we're actually okay, so that we can deliver, because the role has expanded massively. We play a strategic role, we play an operational role, and the governance and even the stuff that will be done by robotics or could be done more easily and efficiently on an outsourced function is still part of your remit. That is now a given. So your job is not 100%, it's 120. And that is the one piece that I think is really important for me that I worry about, being able to be present, to show up and act.
Okay. So the role's grown. It's sitting at 120%. There's more demands on you guys than ever before. let's get into the nitty-gritty. Huge issues in the press, scandals, the finance profession has been rocked. Let's get it. What is lacking at a leadership level in your mind? What is missing at the moment? Zach?
So I think I've got a little bit of experience in this place because I worked at Tongaat. I worked at Ellerines, and now I'm at CLC. I think
Specialist.
From a legal perspective, it's the gift that keeps on giving. We'll always be friends with that.
Well, look, seriously though, I think leadership today, and Joe put it quite succinctly, is things are happening at such a pace, it's very, very easy to make mistakes. I think that's the one thing. The second one is the quality of our boards. And I'm not talking specifically about any board that I've worked on, so all of those board members can rest easy. But the quality of skills at board level, for me, is lacking. We deal with complex issues every day. It's very easy to make a mistake. And if you don't have that guidance and direction from the board, and sometimes big decisions are made, and if they're not up to speed, you can really come a cropper. So you've got to ask yourself the question, where were the auditors? Where was the board? You can't keep putting it on the shareholders. And those are the questions that you need to ask, is where was the governance around that, and how seriously did people take it? The other element is, in a capitalistic society, when you're putting serious bonuses against performance, and you don't have the oversight to make sure that those bonuses are well paid for the right reasons. I see now there's a lot of fund managers that are asking for bonuses to be paid back if anything untoward is found. So I think those would be the key issues that are different today and that are important today.
Joe, I want you to add on that.
Okay. So I agree with you. I think it's interesting. Today is the 4th World or Global Ethics Day, which I find odd that we have one day to celebrate.
And there's only been 4.
Focus on, and only 4. Okay. So more and more, I think it's accountable on us as professionals to be able to stand up and have a voice when we see something not happening. And what's quite interesting, Malcolm Gladwell's latest book on talking to strangers, is we're actually wired for trust. So we have a trust default in the sense that there's not enough doubt that something's wrong. There's not enough. We knew it wasn't great, whether it's Madoff a while ago or whether it's Steinhoff now, etc. But we didn't raise our voices. And the reality there is, from a finance and a professional perspective, how do you make sure that you do raise your voice, that it is documented, that the board that you work on and serve with actually deliver on their mandate in terms of oversight and control? So who you engage with is so much more deliberate. The choices you make in terms of where you work, the individuals you work with, or the board you sit on, need to be very deliberate because you are jointly and severally accountable. It's not as if you're going to be the last person to switch the lights off. As you see, you'll be the first to go. So I think that's the one piece that is really critical, is be very deliberate about the choices you make on who you work with. Make sure you do speak up and out and call people to account in the process. And the other piece is we've got quite a grade industry in the sense that you see so many board chairs then becoming acting CEOs or executives. But they're very grade lines on governance around who's accountable for what. And to be really deliberate in the organization you're in around where it starts and stops so that we can make sure the lines of defense really do work. And in fact, I think public court is holding people more to account than necessarily good governance. So rules will do one thing. Behavior, though, needs to be inculcated in a culture bottom up. And we've got some really good stories on lessons learned. What's interesting is they were saying they did a study that 60% of CEOs are psychopaths.
Only 60?
Studied, only 60. And the reality is you build teams around you and structures around you that say yes to people that generally have a delivery track record. So how do you make sure as the finance professional where you can connect and collect dots and see patterns and things that stand out and don't quite gel, that you actually use your head, your heart and your gut and understand and are genuinely curious about your business and the business of the business to flag things that don't make sense? Because you need to be a strong business partner. A really good, politics is no different. You need a strong opposition to make sure we keep the government honest. The same needs to happen in a partnering relationship. And finance plays such a key role in that. And it's not what we're taught. We're taught to spot the risks, flag them, put mitigating controls, and then say it's reasonable. Yeah. That's not what you're supposed to be doing as you move up the ranks. The reality is reasonable is no longer good enough.
Exactly. the real CFO needs to stand up, really. There's a lot of budding young upcoming C-suite leaders in the room, I'm sure. I want to go back to 1990, maybe even before then.
He's in black and white now.
On your journey, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, I'm sure. A lot of battle scars. Zaf, I'm interested to hear your battle scars. Those stripes, those that got you to where you are, those sets of skills that you can wear, sometimes with pride. Can you tell me some of those battle scars that you faced?
Yeah, he calls it wall paint. It is. I've got scars on my scars. If I had to sit today and say, when I was qualifying as a chartered accountant, I was going to become a medical doctor, let alone try to become an accountant, let alone try to become a CFO. And my one piece of advice is don't plan your life too well. Let it happen. I could never have envisaged in the early 1990s in Isipingo in KZN that I would one day be the CFO of, let alone one big organization, but multiple. Okay. And the lessons you learn along the way, some of them are personal, some of them are professional, and I'll share both with you. I think from a professional point of view, I spoke about the EQ skills, and I can roughly tell you, if you don't know how to solve problems, you're not going to be a real CFO. I call them the weather reporters. You go into a board meeting and people stand up and they tell you what the weather outside is looking like. I can do that myself. You don't need people to tell you what the weather report is. You need people to tell you how to deal with the weather, or how to make money out of the weather, or how to avoid the damage that's caused by the weather. And so problem-solving skills is what your expectation is every day that you show up to work. Because if you can't solve problems, you're not much use. I think that's the first piece. The second one is stakeholder management. In our line of work, we spend a lot of time with our stakeholders, be it auditors, bankers, shareholders, the board, our employees. All of those people, you need to know how to connect with them. And if you don't know how to connect with them, you're not going to be a real CFO. Yeah. And that's at all levels in the organization. You've got to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the business. You've got to be able to understand where the banks are thinking in terms of debt, particularly now in the case in CELC. I've been to China 4 times because that stakeholder management is really important for us. And you've got to rebuild credibility. And you can't do that sitting in your office behind a desk. And then communication skills. Yes, you can engage with your stakeholders, but if you don't know how to communicate and what to say and how to say it, and be respectful of culture and circumstance. Those are skills, and they're really soft skills, but they're very, very important for a real CFO.
And they're built over time, making the mistakes. Joe, your scars? On scars?
I think we all have war wounds. What I don't think we do is share them enough, and everyone thinks that it was quite an easy route to the top, and it's not. It comes with quite a bit of sacrifice, but you get to choose what you sacrifice. And I think I'm naturally fairly optimistic, and as a consequence, I think some of my war wounds were not that I wasn't tackling the right problem, but rather how I tackled the problem. Head on first, bit like a bull in a china shop, but absolutely deliberate and committed to saving the world, but not necessarily the right way. So the risk in that is that you don't take people with you. And you can run really far and really hard, but then there's no one to hand the baton over to, and it's actually not sustainable. So you may be a leader in a sense, but you would not necessarily be leading in the process. So I think that the war wounds and the battle scars is you only get things done through people. And what's quite interesting is I did a segue into the talent space, human capital, which I think is one of the most critical capitals. And one of the ladies I mentor said, someone said it would be a bad idea to go into change management and the HR function. And actually, for me, that was such a good lesson learned, partly because I went in because I thought it would be easier. Do not tell the HRO team downstairs. Okay, it was not easier because you realize that in terms of being what you're wired to do, I love the technical detail in the process. But the people component taught me how important that trust element was. People will be passive-aggressive across Africa. They'll say yes and do something different, potentially, unless they know you and work with you. And more that trust quotient is really important in the relational CFO space. It's when people will put their hands up and they have problems they don't know how to solve versus trying to solve it without your help. It's when people will share opportunities but are not sure where it could land so that it gains some ground or has a voice or gets feet. So I think those pieces were a really important part of my career that helped shape the CFO that I am today, because it's not necessarily taught, the softer skills piece. And there were three things, I think, as CAs, ACCA, finance professionals, CIMA, CIPA, etc. You tick the box on IQ and technical credit. Get your foot in the door. The second thing is around EQ, which can actually be taught. The more conscious you are and aware you are, the better your EQ if you are absolutely focused on it. And I love our current office managing partner says, I'm trying to dial up my green. So when he hugs me, he's there. We'll see how it goes, okay? Then the third one is around that meaningfulness quotient. And if my team and the board I'm on are there for a real purpose and they have sheer belief, your ability to say, is this right? Are we doing the right thing? And will it outlive me? Because unfortunately, we do a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, and not a 20-year one. And the incentives drive you to deliver in short-term bullets. So that's very topical. But actually, what I've found has really made a difference is what they call LQ, so love quotient. And the reason I say that is if you really care about your team, you really care about your business, you really care about your clients, you make a difference. You either change the working conditions and the environment that they're in, you are more deliberate about insights versus reporting. I like the journalist analysis. You want to be investigative and not just say what happened yesterday. And for your clients, you innovate, whether it's incremental, whether it's stakeholder, external, internal. And so for me, I think I've learned in the scars along the way how important being able to take people with you is, because you execute through that process.
Yeah.
And I think over time, that softer skills component, you learn by experience. So we've butted our heads or we haven't been successful. We figure out how to influence, how to interact, and how to collaborate, as opposed to actually saying at the outset, let's understand how we impact the environment we're in, and do we cast a long shadow? I've worked for individuals and before board meetings where the whole office is on edge. You create board packs deliberately to address what that person will ask. And as a consequence, you manage your board. They don't have oversight. There's no stress. There's no process. You need to create an environment that has a little bit of choice.
Absolutely.
And so part of my war words is where possible, if you are where you are by choice, your ability to make the right decisions is better. Sometimes your life position and your life where you are doesn't allow you that luxury. But if you do have it, when you have to make tough choices and have courageous conversations, you can.
So you mentioned courage, and it reminds me of a quote. Winston Churchill, I think he once said, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, but it is the courage to continue that counts." I mean, you have the scars. Zaf, we're talking, you get knocked down 7 times, you get up 8, and that's the life of a CFO. But I mean, let's be honest, okay, so it's the 50th anniversary of the lunar landings, and in Neil Armstrong's book, he talks about we need to fail down here so we don't fail up there. Now, the courage to, have failure as an option in finance, kind of, let's be frank, like you cannot fail in finance. We hear executives going, well, you can, but it's not encouraged.
Sure.
So tell me as a leader, Zaf, how do you balance that ability to encourage maybe innovation, change, doing things differently, smarter, to add more value, but there's that element of how do you balance that? That must be difficult as a leader.
Yeah, I think you've got to be able to be a leader that creates a safety net that allows your people to fail. And if they're going to fail, they must fail quickly. And it's how you handle failure that's more important than the failure itself. A good leader sits around and says, well, let's experiment and let's understand the assumptions on which we're experimenting. And if you are going to fail in that scenario, you know that it's in a controlled environment and you can manage and mitigate the costs of the failure. But I see a lot of people, I see guys coming out of university and we talk, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but they don't learn, you're not taught leadership skills, you're not taught the softer skills, you're not taught what it is to fail. And everything that you've done from school until university, until you write your board exams is how not to fail. When you go for a job interview, the first thing they ask you is, are you a first-time passer?
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not. I passed part 1 first time, but I passed part 2 only the second time. And I passed it. And I became a CFO despite that. And so we put so much of pressure on people to be successful, and we define success as having passed. Yeah. But what are you passing? You're testing your memory recollection. You're not testing how somebody can solve a problem. So what are you testing in school or university? Yeah. How well you can remember the Tax Act, or how well you can remember an auditing statement. And that, I find, is a big disconnect in the world that we're going to compared to the world where we're teaching people. And I think that's wrong. And when you come into a corporate environment straight out of university, out of articles, the guys are, deer in headlamps. They look at this saying, wow, what do we do? And you now have to sit and create the platform for those people to succeed. And that's what a leader does, is create the environment for people to do well. And that comes with failure too.
Yeah. And Joe, I suppose it comes down to, your team and that personal development in your team. You've got a strong affiliation towards people, their wellness, but it's that personal and professional development. How do you bring that into your leadership style? Personal and professional at the same time.
So I think what's really important there is when things go wrong, and they will. So we've shifted from zero tolerance to early alert. And I think that's very important in terms of the team structure. Rather, let's know what's wrong and fix it than say nothing's ever happened. So all green radars worry me. There was an interesting case study by Bain on a project that they were doing, and they actually called aside the IT chap and said to him, if the outcome of your argument around where you are, because everything's green, is additional resources in terms of being able to deliver, and we can guarantee it, how would you rate your current project status? And they lobbied with the head of IT, the CIO, as well as the rest of the project team, and this particular work stream came in and they were all red. And everyone's like, we're supposed to be green. He said, well, to be green, this is what I would need to do. CIO says, 2 more resources, off you go. Next project meeting, everyone's red. Okay, now I have to manage the expectation on resources. But the reality of us actually showing up and saying something's wrong is not what we're taught, to Zaf's point. And so to create that environment, and specifically in my team, the question is, so what went wrong? What did we learn from it? Not who did it and where did it go wrong, but rather what. So it's about the learning construct. And actually what's interesting is we are probably in the best profession to allow ourselves to experiment, because there is an audit trail. You can track what happened, you can fix what happened, you can add a line of defense. However, the ability to really execute on the fix comes down to relationships. So let's say you're about to breach your overdraft limit and it's been a tough cash flow month and your team has predicted it incorrectly. The relationship with the bank allows you to get some headroom of X amount. That is not about business and the management account you submit and the covenant records. That's actually, I know you, you've run your team well, you've given me an early heads up, 3 weeks in advance, here you go, you may never use it, thank you. And I think more and more that is going to be important. So the questions we ask are different, that allow you to create an environment where people can learn and move forward. But it's going to be by experience. So if the last time they got knocked out, they're not going to trust you for the first few times when you say, what happened? How can I help? But as they continue to experience that, you will start to see a little bit of amnesty and saying, listen, let's try and get this over the line. And the buck stops with the CFO. As a team, it'll be finance X and my head on the line. But they have to genuinely experience that to move forward. And in my current role, I have experienced that. One of the team members, something went wrong. They said, like, it's all right, if I need to resign. And I remember going, why are you leaving? Because I was more shocked by that than this. Yeah. And maybe having worked across Africa, you realize you're fighting fires daily. And so deliberately trying to share with them lessons on adversity where people have come up through the ranks. And in fact, recently, I think the story of Elliot Kapitcher that just finished the 2-hour marathon in 1 hour, 59 and 40 seconds. And in 2017, he did it again and failed by 25 seconds. That's when he did his first attempt. Took him 2 years to come back and do it again. No one says, oh, well done, but that time in 2017 wasn't great. And so I think it's about, as long as you move forward, the next best experience someone has with you is a good one, and you keep doing that. And so that's been quite important, is the shift from zero tolerance to early alert and asking, what can I do to help? Which is quite different to what did you do wrong? Yeah. It was important.
And it's funny you bring that up. I love Brene Brown. I think you know that. She talks about vulnerability a lot, and that's about, as a leader, you can be vulnerable and you're allowing your staff to have an element of vulnerability. They say vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, change, and innovation. But it also brings a kind of courage, because it takes courageousness to kind of allow this to happen. Zaf, tell me about how important that courage is as a leader, that trait, which I think is often just swept, courage, rah, but it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Distressed businesses all over the country at the moment, distressed economies. You know, I know we were talking in the previous session about being positive, you know, but you also can't be a blind optimist. You got to also like be able to go, I need to stand up. Talk to me about your courage.
I think to your point, you got to find the opportunity in the problem. Problems have existed. 1987, 1998, all of the crashes that have happened. As a real CFO, you got to find the opportunity in the problem. Because, again, it's the weather report or the journalist. The problems are easy to find. What's that? You find a problem for every solution.
Yes.
So I think courage comes from understanding what you can contribute and add value to. When I started at Ellerines, it was my first CFO job. I was completely unprepared for it. Sitting here, you guys are going to go into that one day, and you're going to wake up the one day and say, what the hell did I get into? When you look at the structural issue at the time, and I'll tell you briefly, there were probably 750 too many furniture stores. And if any of you travel through South Africa, you drive down the main drag of any town, Bradlow's, Ellerines, Bears, Joshua Door, and they all have one or two customers each. So somebody was going to go down. It turned out that it was us.
Yeah.
And the courage comes from speaking the truth, because people in that point in time don't want to hear the truth. They just refuse to accept that the business is going to go under.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what flicked the switch for me was when I stopped thinking of myself and started thinking about the 7,500 people that worked in Ellerines. And timing when to go into a business rescue so that there was enough cash to pay out people that had 35, 40 years of service and who were going to get zero in a liquidation, or had to wait 2 years to get 30,000 rand for all. You can't live with that. And that takes courage. It takes courage to stand up in a board meeting and tell people that they're actually talking bullshit.
Yeah.
And that the reality is this is how it's going to go. The reality is going out and getting the right advice. So going out and consulting with the business rescue practitioner, consulting with the legal guys, getting the right advice because you are out of your depth. I never thought I'd ever work post that, not realizing that the people that wanted to hire me for the skills that I'd learned in that environment. And so, again, find the opportunity in the problem, trust yourself, be honest, and be real. And somebody's trying to convince you that it's not a good thing to put a company into business rescue, and the right thing is that you should stand your ground. And that was the toughest.
That's courageous to stand your ground.
You have to be. But again, if you think about yourself in that situation, you're not going to succeed. Because being selfish is the worst thing you can do. Rather think about putting the company first and putting the employees of the company first. You do that, you'll make the right decisions.
Brilliant. Joe, I'm going to come to you with a quick question, but I just want to come to the audience. We've got about 15 minutes left, but I'd really like you to start considering questions for the panel. This is not about us talking to you, it's about us engaging. So please start thinking about those questions. We're going to wrap up in about 5, 6, 7 minutes, which will give us some time to get some questions from the audience. So please start thinking about that. This is a kind of off the cuff. What book are you reading at the moment, Joe?
Talking to strangers.
Talking to strangers.
Yeah, I'm actually loving it. What's interesting is they were saying you should read, well, they were saying the bedroom's only good for 3 things. Sleeping, reading, and whatever else it is you do in a bedroom. Okay, I have 4 children. So what's interesting is part of that reading piece is that you should be reading things that are not related to your job 90 minutes before bed. And the reality around that is that the front cortex of your brain is where your creativity sits, and unless you allow it to be exercised differently, you don't grow that. We grow 700 new neurons a day. So you've got some neuroplasticity which you need for problem solving. So make the time to read. So I am reading that. It's quite interesting around how we don't read people well and how we don't follow patterns necessarily well because the trust default mechanism. So to Zaf's point, what's been important around that is finding the truth in the message, because courageous conversations are not negotiable. And the only one I would add to your point is to stay the course. Because often what happens is we exit in a process where we know something is wrong. And that is where it goes horribly pear-shaped, because it's what did you do? What could you have done? And did at some point you make sure you had done everything within your power? It is unethical for individuals in our spaces not to do the right thing when we know something isn't working. And to Zaf's point around the fact that we don't like to hear the truth Investor relations are good examples on listed entities. You drip feed the market with the right amount of information to shape market sentiment. It's a bit of a spin doctor piece. And I remember being in an environment where a sell-side analyst had said, when we were in London, what if X, Y, Z happens? And we've got a response for that because there's ABC in the spaces. The reality is actually when you go back and look at it, what is the impact on the business, the individuals in the business, and the client that will be impacted in that scenario? And when we start to unpack that, actually, we're not wired for stuff that goes wrong. We're agile enough to change direction, but we don't necessarily go into recovery. And so what I've learned is that boards are very good at turnaround strategies. When we're close to failure, we bring in, we do a turnaround strategy. What we don't look at is when business as usual is good, what is likely to go wrong, and plan for a future where things may either we're cannibalized or things are different. And if we can start to think more proactively about that, which this book is, we can always in retrospect say this is what has caused this to happen in history. But if we are a history maker here before things go wrong, where are we as CFOs starting to look at the business critically, not just around what our day job is, but what will the future of this business look like, I think is really important.
Brilliant, brilliant. One of my favorite books, I'm passionate about leadership, and I've been searching for a definition around leadership for a long time, and there's a book by James Kerr called Legacy. It's about how the All Blacks always win, and given it's a Rugby World Cup, except this World Cup, hopefully. And he has and Zaf, I want you to comment on this. He's got a definition. It goes, it's a facilitated style of interpersonal leadership in a learning environment concerned with adaptive problem solving and continuous improvement, in which humility, not knowing all the answers, drives strength. What are your thoughts on that quote?
Fits in with the real CFO. And I'll tell you why, because we're not the guys that stand up and face the press. We're not the picture of the company, but we quietly sit in the background and get the stuff done. Our job is to make the CEO look good. That's what we do, right? And we do it every day. We get up every morning and do it. And that's a little bit like how a team operates. Yeah. It's normally the captain or the coach that stands up and speaks to the press. But people forget the hard work that happens with the backroom staff, the coaching staff, and all of that that puts this whole package together. And it's easy to forget that it's the iceberg, right? And if you look at the All Blacks against the Springboks, I mean, for that first 15 or 20 minutes, we were all over them. But we couldn't convert territory and possession into points. And what did they do? They caught us on the break, 2 runaway tries, and that was game over. Because you can't come back against All Blacks. And they were patient, they waited their time, they took their opportunities. So the lesson for me, and all of us rugby fans, when you get the opportunity, score the points.
Yeah,
don't lose that opportunity, because those opportunities don't come by every time. And if there isn't an opportunity, make that opportunity.
You had we were talking about leadership, and you had a great leadership quote about the throwing stones. Please share it with everybody. Sure. I absolutely loved it.
If you stop to throw stones at every dog that barks, you'll never reach your destination. I think it was Winston Churchill. Really? But focus is so important for us. It's easy to get misled with everything else that's going on in the business, and you get pulled in all sorts of directions. It's easy to do your finance executive's job, but that's not going to help you. It's not going to help the company. Focus and stay the course. Do what you need to do, because that's what the business is depending on you to do. Don't be the CEO. Don't be the finance guy. Be the CFO.
Yes, CFO. Okay, so start getting your questions ready. We're going to wrap up, and then we're coming to you. Joe, one thing. What is the one thing that defines you as the real CFO?
Can I add one thing to Zaf? Because I'm a proper 2.1, 2.2 person.
Go for it.
Is that okay? I just wanted to add on to your point around humility and why that's so important. What I had to learn and didn't learn early in my career, and I wish I had, is that you must build on your strengths, because that's what sets you apart. Be very conscious of your weaknesses, the things you're not great at, whether it's detail or technical accounting, or depending on where it sits in ops, and then recruit people that are particularly good at that and allow them to call you out when they say, actually, you've missed this one. And I did think that advice is so important around humility, is that be conscious of what you're good and great at, be very conscious of what you need help with, and be absolutely open to the right people helping you with that stuff. So that's the one thing. In terms of what defines me as leader, I think I genuinely do care about my people. I'm a bit of a Maya Angelou fan, and one of her quotes is, people will forget what you said, what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And I think for me, that's really important in the role that we play in the process. And to your other point, I think you've said it before, is to starve to feed your focus and to starve your distractions.
Brilliant.
Okay, so to really, this is where we want to go.
Zaf, just to end off, up-and-coming CFOs in this room, I'm sure there's some really talented individuals. What is the one tool or two sets of advice you could give someone in this audience that they could start today that could help them get to that C-suite where they can learn a few of the get a few scars on the way? But what would that advice be to the audience?
Okay. Number one, don't follow social media. It'll make you feel ugly. It'll make you feel bad. It'll make you feel that everybody else is much better than you. And so self-belief is my first lesson. Hey, I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the prettiest guy. I'm not the best CA. I didn't come top in my class. I failed. It's okay. I still got to be a CFO. So believe in yourself and believe in your journey and start that journey one step at a time. So don't ever give up and think that you are worthless, because you're not.
Love it.
And social media is a terrible, terrible thing. I think it's a cancer, frankly. So that's kind of the one thing. The second one is, don't plan your career. Let it happen. Joe, I mean, you and I have been in I don't know how many businesses. Don't. You know, I came into telco, coming from burgers. And before that, it was furniture. People said to me, you'll get to understand this business in the next couple of years. No, I don't have the luxury of that. I need to understand it today. And everybody tells me that you need to understand telco to do it. I think the opposite. You need to bring a fresh perspective. And if you want to bring a fresh perspective to a new role, do it. Don't sit and go in there and be part of that group think of how this is how we've done it around here for the last 10, 15 years. No.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, you're going to be disintermediated by your competition.
Right.
Or by a new entrant that you never saw coming. And so that's my advice.
Joe, wrap it up for us, and then we're going to get some really brilliant questions from the audience.
Don't dwell on the things that go wrong. Learn, focus forward. I think it makes a really big difference. And go home every day with your values and your pride intact, that you did stand your ground, you did share your voice, you did do that, and actually don't believe the first story you hear. So understand how to discover the truth, whether it's social media, etc., because that will help fuel your self-belief. There's something inside of you that says yay or nay, and then ask for help. Zaf and I would never say no to someone saying, can I soundboard something with you? And the opportunity for that, particularly with these forums, didn't exist when we were younger. Leverage it. There's a whole network of people that want to help you get there.
Absolutely brilliant. Can I ask everyone to give the panel a round of applause, please? And then if you could just raise your hand for questions, Didi will pass.
Thank you very much for such an inspired discussion. Wanted to just find out if any of the panelists can comment on the importance of getting the CFO on your side, the CEO, on your side, early on as you start, so that you've got their confidence. She mentioned something very interesting to say 60% of CEOs are psychopaths. I'm looking at the fact of that if you don't have that confidence, if you don't strike it off on a good note from the start, it might impact on your career in that particular aspect.
Can I take some?
Yes.
So I think 3 things that I learned that are important. 1, understand what the CEO expects of you. What is your expectation of me as a partner in the business and director or leader in the process? 2, generally, the pieces you are concerned about in terms of level of autonomy, without enough rope to play but not hang yourself, will be good for the business and good for you. If you keep the business at the center of what you're doing, that's really important around the relationship with the CEO. But if you don't have a relationship, and it is about, do as I say, this is how I operate, or actually you should be comfortable, or you have your place, the reality is then you're not partnering the business. Then you are a soldier and executing. And I suppose earlier on in my career, I learned from a really wise man that worked in banking all of his life and retired in Asia last year and said, you haven't joined the army. It's not loyalty. You don't come in and do as you're instructed. You've joined the corporate world where commitment, which is quite different to loyalty, means you are there by choice and you have a voice. You have to establish the rules of engagement early on. What is your level of authority? What decision-making parameters are there? And what are your areas of escalation? Because sometimes Zaf and I have been in a situation where we haven't agreed with the CEO, and we are the only voice that hasn't agreed with the CEO. In both our cases, our next jobs came as a result of what we would call robust, constructive dissent, because we want to do what is right.
Brilliant.
But understand that relationship piece is critical. You can't work around it. You have to engage on it and work through it in the process.
Zach.
Don't define your role based on your CEO.
Mm-mm.
Your CEO is not your friend.
No.
Douglas happens to be my friend, but that's a separate issue. Okay. I've worked with Leon Kikinis, Peter Stoudy, Greg Solomon. I've worked with great and bad CEOs. Okay, they don't define who I am and what I need to do. I've got a job to do. And at the end of the day, my fiduciary duty is to the company.
Right.
Yes, understand and manage expectations of them, but they don't define who you are.
No. The
Next
mandate
question.
is clear.
Questions down there.
That answer your question.
Brilliant.
Good morning. My name is Sazi. Thank you for the talk. It's really real. So my question is, I'm a young CA. I mean, there's a host of opportunities that are out there. And I hear Zaf saying that don't plan your career, right? And I think that in a world where we're taught, plan, if you don't plan, you're planning to fail. So now, how do you make the decision of your next step? Because I'm thinking to some extent it should be strategic. So then how would you basically move on in your career?
So I can't even remember my first job, to be honest. It's way too long ago. But, firstly, you've got to focus on getting the right skills, okay? And that's very strategic. So learn the skills that we spoke about earlier, the softer skills, the EQ stuff. Go and learn that stuff. You don't need a job to learn that. Secondly, take a job, and when you get into a job, and when you are in your comfort zone, that's when you leave. If you're comfortable in your job, all of you, if you're comfortable, leave tomorrow. Because you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not developing. Okay? So take any job, but get in there, get the experience. And then when you get comfortable, time to go.
Can I just add to that? So I think, and leave it to top of your game. You always wonder why sports stars retire, because actually you're on a high note, if it makes sense. I do think as you go higher up in your career, it's not so much about not planning, but be deliberate about your choice. So the skills in your bucket that you have and that you've gained over time, what's missing? And then when something comes to find you, or there's an opportunity that comes along, you seize it and say, does it fill those skills in my bucket that are missing? And what we often do is we take the safer route. Because actually the skills in the bucket means that I don't know everything about that job. And I'm not sure I want to take it. It is okay as long as you are learning. And it is okay as long as you are very honest about that process going into it. So be deliberate about the choices that you make, but don't be closed to there's only one way to go. Because there are multiple routes to get to the CFO role or the C-suite. And they're not always the traditional ones you would have expected. So who you work for, that'll give you those opportunities. What your network looks like so that you can plug into it is important. And leveraging off of forums like this. Pick the next role that's harder than the comfort zone that you're in.
Just Rumi had a quote. You climb up a mountain and you follow one path to the top of the mountain. When you get to the top of the mountain and look down, you see every other path that could have got you to the top.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So we're going to have to wrap that up. We've run out of time. I want to thank you all. Please give the panel a round of applause. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Zaf.